What's going on? Welcome back to another video. In today's video we're going to be covering the 5 best modifications to let somebody else to do because they're just not worth doing it yourself, so stay tuned. So welcome back to another one. Today we're covering, as I mentioned, the 5 best modifications to let someone else do for you because it's just not worth doing it yourself. These modifications I feel are either time consuming, tedious, or somebody else because of a lack of experience on your part maybe, and my part as well. You know, I'm not saying this because I know better. I'm saying this because I definitely don't know better and I would take it to somebody else that does know better. But for those reasons, you know, these are the modifications that I take my car somewhere else because you're either going to get a better job done, a proper job done, or it's just going to save you a lot of time as well in comparison to what it actually costs to get these things done. Normally, with things that I'm going to be covering very soon, the amount of time it takes for you to get the said modification done yourself with a lack of experience versus a trained professional or somebody who's been doing it for the past 5 years, the time difference is just not worth it. Anyway, let's go into it. So the first one has to be tints. Tints, in my opinion, is something that if you are doing this yourself on your own car, you don't really know what you're looking at as far as tints are concerned, and you could spend a full couple of hours researching it, you know, looking at UV protection films, ones that actually have a UV rating, looking at the correct window tint film so that you are legal and compliant. In the UK, for example, if you're tinting the front side windows, you can have up to a certain percentage tint. I covered a video previously on car modifications that covers that, so if you are curious about how much tint you can have, I've covered that previously, check that out above. But for me, it's making sure it's done right. If you do it wrong, if you get the tint percentage wrong because your windows already have a very small amount of tint within them, or the glass has got, you know, a slight, it takes away some of the light, if you like, that can pass through it, and then you're going for the darkest tint possible off the shelf. It's not got any sort of UV protection in it, so it's, you know, it's probably worse. It's going to make your car hot as well, and you know, there's all these factors to consider. Whereas if you go to someone and say, this is what I want, this is what I want it to do, this is how much I'm willing to pay, they'll give you all the options. Not only is it going to be better from a knowledge perspective, shall we call it, but it's also going to be better from a time consumption, you know, sort of standpoint, from how much time it's going to take you to install tints and cut them to shape and all that sort of stuff, in comparison to going to somebody that's done it for the last 4 or 5 years or however long and can just get on with it. It's done within a couple of hours. You know, it's just so much better as far as I'm concerned. I remember I tried to tint the rear windows in my EG Civic. Didn't go to plan. I didn't keep the tint in there any longer than 5 minutes because I just couldn't cut it right, and I wasn't happy with the finish. You know, I did manage to get all the bubbles out, but I only did the 2 rear side windows, you know, the 2 rear passenger windows, if you like. I didn't do the boot because it was just too finicky. It was just way too much, and I'd spent 4 hours on it at that point, and there was no going back. So that was me done with tint. Number 2 then, the next one has to be new tyres. Now, you can fit them yourself, you know, with a bar. You can have a go yourself if you got the machinery, or if you can even borrow the machines to do it with. But as far as I'm concerned, it's something that I'd want to be done right. I'd want my valves changing, I'd want it to be balanced, you know, and it stands to reason, in my opinion, if this is something you're wanting to do to get some new tyres put on your car, it's best not to cheap out. It's best not to even go down to your local breakers who will, you know, swap a tyre on and off the rim for you there and then for like £5. I'd rather go to somebody that's got the correct equipment, can take the tyre off properly, not damage my wheels, put a new tyre on again, not damage my wheels, put the tyre on positioned correctly because they do actually have a counterweight for where the valve would go on the wheel itself. All that sort of stuff, you know, they would take into consideration as a trained professional, and make sure that the rotation of the tyre is correct for what corner it's going to be on the car, whether it's going to be left or right, if it's an asymmetric design, etc, etc. These guys know what they're doing, and I would rather take it somewhere that has the correct machines, the correct experience, all that sort of stuff, than go down to a breaker's yard and have somebody swap on and off the tyre. I'd rather buy used tyres and then take them to a proper fitter to get them to do them, balance them up, all the rest of it. So that's number 2, tyres. Number 3 would be an exhaust manifold. Now, I've taken off exhaust manifolds, put them back on, done all the rest of it. And I'm talking about on a Honda B series, D series, H series engines. I've done all 3 exhaust manifolds, taken them off, put them back on. They're nice and easy. The exhaust manifold's right in front. But if you're talking about something with a V6, if you're talking about something that's not easy to access and something that you're going to need to be under the car more than what you are on top of the car or in front of the car, for example, or even behind the engine block, and you've got subframes and things like that the exhaust manifold's wrapped around, some of them can be an absolute nightmare, and I've had good experiences working on Hondas with exhaust manifolds, but I do know that on some cars you've got limited space. Sometimes you need, equipment, if you like, to try and get the car up in the air, or to try and position the car correctly so that you can get full access to where you need to get the exhaust manifold bolts out of the head, or studs or nuts or whatever it is. So yeah, exhaust manifolds, if you wanted to swap it for an aftermarket manifold and get rid of catalytic converters, maybe if you're going for a catalyst system, or just get rid of the primary cat and keeping the secondary cat, those sort of things, if that's sort of modification that you're wanting to do to get a bit more power and look for further gains later down the line with remaps and things like that, then I'd definitely recommend getting your exhaust manifold swapped by a trained professional mechanic, because if you strip one of them bolts or strip one of them, you're in for a bad time. So that's number 3, and that's exhaust manifolds. Number 4 then would be clutches and flywheels. Now if you're getting a clutch done, you're best off replacing the flywheel, or at least getting the flywheel resurfaced, or you can just throw them in and give them a scuff up, and I've done that before myself. But getting in there as well is a difficult task in itself. You've got prop shaft or drive shafts to come out, you've got the gearbox to pull out, which is a heavy unit. You've got to get the car high enough so that you've got enough space to work underneath it, as well as get the gearbox out with you underneath it. You might need to support the engine as well, and the engine might not be supported fully without the gearbox being attached to it and the gearbox being mounted to the chassis. You're talking about some heavy weights here, and weights that if they drop on you, you could be brown bread. So I'd highly recommend getting a clutch fitted by a professional in a garage with all the correct tools, all the correct safety gear, all the, can get it up in a ramp, get a gearbox stand under it, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's just a time consuming process as well, even at a garage with all the tools and the ramps and that sort of stuff, and easy, things to ease access. If you're doing it on a driveway, got the gearbox out on your chest while you try to wiggle underneath the car, and it's just a nightmare. I've done it a few times and it's shit to put it bluntly. So yeah, number 4, anything that involves taking the box off, clutch, flywheel, that sort of stuff. But yeah, you can just get the right advice as well from the garage that's doing it at the time. If you've got a dual mass flywheel, for example, and you've got any sort of play in that, recommended that you do it at the same time that you need a clutch, or if the flywheel's gone and that's why you're in that area in the first place, it's recommended definitely that you do the clutch with the flywheel, because that's a wear and tear component. You're in there already, you may as well. And number 5, the last one in the list, would have to be final drive ratios. Now if you're doing anything to do with the gearbox, if you're opening up the gearbox, or even in a rear wheel drive car, if you're opening up the diff, you want to make sure that the final drive ratios are right. You don't want the bearings to be seated incorrectly. You don't want to, mess up any kind of sealant or anything like that. You don't want to be the guy that's spent 3-4 hours getting, the diff off, stripped down, new final drive or an LSD or whatever it is, that whatever you're doing in the gearbox or in the rear diff, fitted, bearings in, put it all back together, fill it up with oil, and then it drips. It's on the floor and you need to get it back off, you need to strip it all down again, you need to make sure it's sealed correctly. You don't want to be that guy, you don't want to be in that position. I personally, if I was getting a gearbox built, I'd probably take it to a gearbox specialist. If it's a rear diff, I'd probably have a go at doing that myself, but knowing full well that if I have an issue, I'm doing it all again, so I wouldn't want to be in a position where I didn't have my car, where I needed my car the next day for work, for example, and where I had a situation where I'm going to have to pay for somebody to do it because I don't have the time, or because I can't do it myself, or that this is the sort of job, in my opinion, that's a big enough job to justify paying somebody that knows what they're doing, knows what they're up to. A bonus one though, number 6 if you like, would be a head gasket. Now it's not exactly a modification of sort, but it's certainly something that if I was going to get done, and I didn't have the time, I wanted it to be done right, and you know, I didn't have a second car, for example, then I wouldn't take it on myself. I'd look at getting it outsourced, I'd look at getting it done by a garage so that I know it's done right. Now, that being said, I would make sure you get a reputable garage to do it. I'd want to make sure that the cylinder head's resurfaced, if it can be, or that the cylinder head's replaced, because I know that some cars, if the cylinder head's warped, for example, through coolant escaping where it shouldn't do, or the head overheating due to coolant loss, which can happen with a head gasket failure, I'd want to make sure that the head's replaced or resurfaced, whichever's relevant to that particular engine. I know that some manufacturers don't do resurfaceable heads, so that can be quite costly as well, so I'd want to make sure that it's done right. So if you end up buying a car with a knackered head gasket, that's something that I wouldn't want to do myself, unless I'd bought it as a second car, as a doer-upper, as a project car, and I did a head gasket with my dad on the EG Civic when I first got that, when it had the D series engine in. It's just time consuming, you're stripping all the top of the head, or the top of the engine should I say, and timing belt, having to retime it all that sort of stuff, and while you're there you may as well do tap hits, all that sort of stuff, and it's just very, very time consuming. So if you don't have a car already, or if you don't have a second car to use, I'd definitely get somebody else to do that. So they're my 5 and a bonus modifications or repairs in the instance of the 6th one, maybe even the 4th one as well. Maybe the 5th if it was synchros and ratios, you know, on the final drive ratio or LSD fitment, if it was synchros that you wanted to do during that time, maintenance maybe for those 3 examples, but mainly modifications that I would get somebody else to do. They're my 5 plus 1. So I hope you enjoyed this particular video, and it's very, very different to what I normally do. If you liked it, please give the video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.